Awesome. Hello, everyone. Good evening. The hard part's over. You've carved out this hour to help learn about how you can be a better advocate for your child. And I'm so excited to have all of you here with us tonight. Would just invite everyone to start by taking a deep breath. I know that always puts me in a better place. Where is everyone dialing in from? If you can throw answers in the chat. Awesome. LA, California. I know we still have folks coming in. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. My name is Marissa. I'm one of the co-founders of Beaming Health. We're a free resource for families like yours and mine navigating developmental differences. We're lucky today to be joined by advocates Leigh and Sarah to talk all things IEP. They've been there before and have worked with so many families over the years to help them navigate these very difficult processes. But before we jump in, a few housekeeping items. First, we're going to give away 2 Amazon gift cards tonight, and I'll share more about how you can do that by joining our community. And let's see, if you have questions, don't be shy about throwing them in the chat. We'll be moderating as we go. Leigh and Sarah will kick it off with a 20-minute presentation, and then we'll get into Q&A. And don't worry about writing everything down. The session will be recorded, so if you want to watch anything again, you will be able to do that. And without further ado, Leigh and Sarah, take it away.
Thank you, Marissa. I'm Leigh. This is Sarah, and we are here, as you know, to discuss how to ace IEP team meetings. Rule number 1, we recommend that you go in prepared. During this presentation, we're going to tell you how to do that. We're going to demystify the process, break down the steps, and tell you what you need to do to be ready to fully participate as an equal member of your child's IEP team. Let's start. Who we are, as Marissa said, we are experienced moms. Sarah has a teenager. I have a not so young adult who are both on the autism spectrum and who have needed advocacy from an early age. Our child's needs are different, but our struggles have been the same to get our child what they're entitled to from the public school without having to go to war over it and without making it any more unpleasant than it has to be. We both took a year-long training class. It's called SEAT 2. It's the Council of Parents, Advocates, and Attorneys. It's a national nonprofit that supports people who work supporting families of kids with disabilities and those families. So I originally joined it as a parent and now have joined it as an advocate, as has Sarah, and they do annual conferences. They have a 1-year special education advocacy training, which is what SEAT stands for, where you learn the rules, the regulations, and how to apply them to documents. So there's no national cert for what you're required to do to be an advocate, but we wanted to do the coursework and take the time to really learn our trade. And then also, as Marissa said, we've been doing this a very long time, both with our children, as volunteers for other families before we turned pro, and as professional for the last several years. We are advocates. We work with families of children 3 to 22, and it's not just a job for us. It's very personal. It's something we care deeply about, and getting someone else's child what he or she needs. We have the same feelings and passion that we do with our own child.
Ensuring meaningful parent participation. Collaboration is key. Walk into the meeting feeling like everyone at the table, or now on Zoom, is actually in it for the same reasons. We all want the child to be successful. Send the IEP team an email 2 weeks prior to your meeting, asking them to send all documents that they intend to present at the meeting 3 to 4 days prior to your meeting. I'm going to repeat that because that was a lot, and I know that. Send the IEP team an email 2 weeks prior to your meeting, asking them to send all documents that they intend to present at the meeting 3 to 4 days prior to your meeting. Why? So you can read through them. I recommend you read them a minimum of twice. The first read through can be quicker, more cursory. You kind of review it, set it down, walk away. When you come back, sit down with a pen and a highlighter and start making notes. Start looking for items that you want to discuss during the meeting. You want to write your questions down in advance. Send a written list of your parent concerns regarding your child's education to your case manager several days in advance of the meeting so everyone can come prepared to answer your questions. Things to consider. Are there unmet needs that are not already a goal that need to be addressed? Have things changed from the last meeting? Something that you should consider are successes. Has your child done something really well that you really want to share? Are there new struggles? Keep those things in mind as you read through.
Understanding the IEP process. It's a linear set process. Sometimes parents will start a new IEP meeting by asking what services the student's going to receive. That is a great question, but nobody knows that at the beginning of the meeting. It comes as you go through the steps, and you'll see in front of you an excellent diagram on what those steps are. The process starts by you and the school identifying where the student needs additional support. You both compile a list, write it down, and these concerns, support concerns, can be academic, social, medical, speech, pretty much anything and everything that impacts your child's ability to access their education should be included. You should also know that education is not just academic. It's not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also speech, social, interpersonal relationships, many other factors. So those needs will trigger the district doing an assessment. You'll get a document that says all the tests they're going to do, and you have the option of having additional input on that too, but that should list all the concerns and that they're going to be doing testing in those concerns. The results of those assessments are how the team determines the goal. You'll have a list of goals. From those goals, you'll have services, supports, modification, accommodations, and placement. So you can see why asking for specific services at the beginning of the meeting, kind of jumping ahead in the process.
SMART goals and baselines. What is a SMART goal? Specific, measurable, accurate, relevant, and time specific. A simple first step when looking at a goal is to determine, does the baseline almost exactly match the actual goal? We don't want subjective goals. We want specific and measurable goals. Are the goals aggressive but yet achievable within a year? The intention is to get the child to catch up academically. However, if they are years behind, it may take more than 1 year for that to actually happen. Another thing to think about when you look at the goals is if the provider changes, you have to move, or a new provider steps in to train, is somebody else going to be able to read the goals and work on them with your child? A lot of times they can be verbose or confusing, and it's okay to tell the team that it's confusing and that they need to break it down. I have a couple of examples for goals. One is the baseline, Johnny likes to jump. The example goal is Johnny will run 2 miles in 25 minutes. If you think about it, the goal and the baseline do not match. So again, the baseline should match the goal. Johnny can run 2 miles in 35 minutes is a better baseline.
Communicate politely with school staff. I understand wanting to shout at somebody. It's never been a good idea. And especially now, these are really tough times for school staff with people being out sick, with COVID, with the whole everything going on, and a teaching shortage. You've got that as the baseline. And then on top of that, teaching's always been a really time-intensive job. They got to create curriculum, grade, teach, mentor, attend IEP and 504 meetings before and after school. A lot of them have their own children. There's a lot of competing demands on their time. Doesn't mean your child doesn't need what they need. It's just, I think being aware of what's going on in other people's lives can help us understand how to approach something. So if I'm already stressed out and somebody's having a go at me, it's going to be tough for me to want to be as collaborative. So we recommend being unfailingly polite, persistent, but unfailingly polite, and always presume good intent. 99.9% of teachers went into this line of work because they love kids and they want to help kids. And even when I'm really bugged at one, they went into this to help kids. And I try to reconnect to that reason on why they're doing this. That helps me stay centered and approach them the way I like to be approached. If you're not getting what you need from your child's teacher, follow up with a polite email. If you don't receive a response in a day or two, what I like to do is send another email saying, I'm not sure if you saw this, but here's my question, because maybe they didn't see it. That's not been known to happen to me from time to time. I try not to, but it does. Keeping the tone as light as possible. Assume they got busy and didn't see it. If it's urgent, then obviously that's different. I would follow that up with a phone call or ask them to please acknowledge receipt of this email. If after multiple attempts to contact the teacher, you don't get a response, then escalate it to the next person above them at the school. But I always do them the courtesy of letting them know that I'm going to do it so they're not surprised and feel like I tried to ambush them. Relentless politeness is going to be a huge factor in better working relationships, and that benefits our kids.
It's all about the money. Special education is expensive for the school districts. Providers cost money. Specialized equipment that the kids need costs money. What we call a SKIA, which is a one-to-one aid, costs money. And training for parents costs money. Unfortunately, for the school districts, that's their problem. It's not our problem. A lot of times you'll hear, instead of, we don't have the money for that, something along the lines of, we don't do that here. Or, I hear that you know about X program, but we use Y program instead because of financial reasons. Unfortunately, they cannot also use financial reasons to deny services to your child. It's always nice to go into a meeting feeling collaborative, as I said earlier, and listen and talk to them and see if you can come to a reasonable agreement.
Placement options. I remember when my kid was small and they said, well, he's going to go here. And I didn't know what else to ask for. It was like there were all these possibilities, but I didn't even know what they were. And when you asked, they wouldn't give me a straight answer. And a lot of parents call me and say, we have options? And I'm like, yeah. And then I tell them what I'm about to tell you. Your child is entitled by federal regulations to be educated in the least restrictive environment with their typically developing peers to the extent possible. I could spend half an hour on that statement. I'm not going to. However, know that where your child is placed will impact what they receive, how they receive their access to their peers. It is a huge factor. And as a member of the IEP team, and you're the member of the IEP team that's going to be in your kid's life in 10 years. Nobody else is going to be there in 10 years. So in my mind, as the key member of the IEP team with the biggest investment in how this works out, you have a say. So make them share the options and kind of know where you think you want to ask for when you go in and be prepared. So possible placement options. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly so we have plenty of time for Q&A, but regular ed is typical peers all day, every day. Regular ed with push-in services is your child is in regular ed and the speech, the resource teacher, the special ed teacher is a resource teacher in this case, or the OT can push into the classroom. There's regular ed also where the child is pulled out of the classroom for those services to be in a different room on the same campus. There's a number of reasons for that. Younger kids typically don't care if somebody pushes in. Once they get to preteen, teen, they don't want to be embarrassed and be seen as different in front of their classmates. So we can get away with more when the kids are littler. Those are both your kids' primary placement is regular ed, but they get additional services. SAI, we love our acronyms as special ed. We love them, is specialized academic instruction. It is when your child spends all day in a special ed classroom with other kids who have similar support needs. So there's a full SAI for kids who are considered mild to moderate support needs, and there's full-time SAI for kids with moderate to severe support needs. In both cases, it is possible to include your child. However, if the teams decided that your child's support needs are high enough to recommend a specialized academic instruction, you almost certainly will have to advocate for it. And that we do that for a lot of clients. There is a lot of IEPs will also say, well, the child is being included 20% of the time. And I'll say, oh, is that lunch and recess? And they'll say, well, yes, it is. We have a term for that. We call it inclusion by error. Because if the regular ed kids don't see our kids all day, then how included are we really? Being on the same playground in different pods isn't really inclusion. There is, for almost every student, there are some, if not many things they can be successfully included in. This is a particular passion of ours. For the little ones, there's circle time, there's art, there's science, there are so many things. And I have met maybe one kid in the years I've been doing this that just wasn't quite ready for inclusion at that time, but it's always a goal and something to work towards. If none of the classrooms at your local school district are suitable, they will refer out to county special education programs. These are often pretty behavior-based or for kids with very high support needs. For the kids the county and the district can't handle, there are non-public schools. There are non-public schools for kids with autism that specialize in, for instance, behavior support and AAC, since a lot of autistic kids don't have full speech. There are NPSs that are targeted just towards children that have very high behavior support needs with or without learning challenges. So there are a number of NPS options. Those require a referral from the school along with the admission that this just isn't working. And parents and the district typically figure that out together. The most restrictive is home hospital, which is when your child is too ill to go to school and has a doctor's note stating that, and they have to send material for your child to keep them as involved as possible. So you can do a mix, and there are always inclusion options.
Record all IEP team meetings. Honest people make mistakes, myself included. Sometimes I don't admit it, but it's true. We had one client where 5 items that had been agreed to during the IEP team meeting were missing from the final document on read-through. So I went back, listened to the recording, discovered what was missing, sent a note to the team, and we were able to communicate via email and have that corrected, have those items re-added, and then read through, everything was fine, and it was signed. Another issue that could happen is your child is in a year, and this happens because it's happened to my own son, where it's just complicated. And we keep going 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, or at least that's how it feels. So you end up in a lot of IEP team meetings. It can get overwhelming tracking exactly what each meeting is for. It's not just overwhelming for a parent, it's overwhelming for the school staff at times as well. We are not the only case on their load. So if you record an IEP team meeting, you can go back to the previous recording, listen to the final 10 to 15 minutes at most, and just hear what agenda items were pushed to the next meeting. Recording a meeting is not being antagonistic at all. It's actually trying to collaborate, so we make sure that all things are accounted for.
An alternate slide, the title for this slide was, to steal a line from Fight Club, don't talk about IEP Fight Club. Really, don't talk about it. Make sure everything is written down. If you've gotten something that you've wanted or that your child needs in an IEP team meeting, make sure it's written into the document. Request for assessments, anything IEP related, it's got to be written down. People change, people forget things. A teacher leaves mid-year, you move. Things happen all the time, and make sure it's in writing so you can track it, and make sure it's in the IEP document before you agree to it. Because if it's not there, if you come back later and say, well, where's this? Well, I don't see that there. And please write it down. Email's perfect.
Making a written record of significant and important conversations. Memorializing a significant conversation with a provider or a case manager is important. The reason why is because our memories are not perfect. We get off the phone, life happens. I have 3 kids. I know my clients have other children. We're working. There's exposures at school, all those fun things, right? So we think, well, I'll just remember what we said. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily accurate. So I recommend you sit down, spend 2 minutes and jot down notes. I send a note to the team letting them know that I spoke with the OT or the SLP or the case manager. This is what was discussed. This is what we decided, and that's it. I don't expect a reply. They don't need to answer. We did have a situation where a child's speech pathologist called a parent offline just to check in and say, hi, this is how things are going after the winter break. It seemed completely fine. And they decided between them that one part of the goal with social skills was just not working because they needed to get reacquainted. And so they decided to focus on the second piece of the goal rather than the goal in entirety for the next 4 to 6 weeks. The mom just sent an email and let the entire team know.
None of us reads the pages of terms and conditions we get with things like new Apple products, and I'm not picking on Apple. Everybody does it. Every tech company, you sign your life away. I don't read them. If you do, bless you, but I don't think most of us do. This is the exception to that. This is a binding contract that says what your disabled child's education is going to be for the next year and what are the supports and services. This is a big deal. And what we've seen happen is at the end of meetings is the person doing the documentation will push it over to the parent, when we're meeting in person or electronically, and say, so are you ready to sign agreement to the IEP? Please don't sign this contract without reading it. I'm not suggesting anybody's pulling anything, but honest people make mistakes. Sometimes there's a typo in them that substantively changes something, or sometimes that person was distracted when a key point was being made. I'm not assuming ill intent, but as we said earlier, if it's not written down, it never happened. So you very much want to make sure that it's there. It's much easier to get things corrected and added prior to signing it too. So there are options for that. Sarah's going to go into them next in case that's not able to happen. But what we do is take them home, read them, and then if we have any corrections, we immediately email the IEP team and say, could you please add this on page 12? And they say yes or no.
Options for disagreement with an IEP. There's 3 consent boxes on the IEP document at the end. The first one is, I agree to the IEP document. The second, I agree with the following exceptions. And there's this little baby line where if you have something really, really tiny and you have great handwriting, you could probably write it in there. The third is, I disagree with this IEP. The goal is to sign what you can agree to rather than not to sign. If you check box number 2, you can either write your disagreements on those teeny tiny lines, or you can write in a separate document for a parent addendum. The addendum then becomes a part of the actual IEP document. There is almost always something that you can agree to with the IEP to sign it, even if it is only that your child is eligible for the IEP.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Leigh, Sarah. That was awesome. Super helpful foundation for everyone. And I'm sure folks have different questions to their specific situations while everyone is processing all of that. Just want to remind everyone that we are doing a giveaway today. So if folks are, I'll send an email after the session today with notes on how you can be part of that. I don't want to distract too much from this awesome conversation here. So as soon as folks are ready, I know Leigh and Sarah are excited to take questions. And I know while folks are processing, that was a lot of awesome information. One question I had, Sarah, when you were talking about recording significant conversations, how would I know when something is one of those conversations, do you think? Or how would I know when something would be relevant for telling the team?
Well, the example of the SLP saying the speech goal had 2 pieces to it, and one piece was working after a break, and the other piece they just kind of needed to table. Mm-hmm. That's one. If there is a significant change in provider that someone called you and let you know that this person wasn't going to be there anymore, which sometimes that happens. If you become close to a provider, which I have with my own son several times, sometimes you get a little whisper. I would also say if there's progress not being made and you're trying to work that out, those types of things.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Super helpful. Leigh, anything you'd add?
Yeah, thanks for asking. If things aren't going particularly well, so we have a client right now who they're calling the parents to pick him up after 2 hours of school every day. That's a little bit of a problem. I've asked the parents to start documenting these conversations because he's in 2nd grade and he can't learn what he needs to learn in 2nd grade, leaving after 2 hours every day. So the principal was grabbing him to give the dad to give verbal explanations on why he should go home after 2 hours every day. And I suggested that he start documenting these conversations so that we can get the child the additional behavior support he needs to keep him in school full time. Mm-hmm. So that would be a case if especially when it's not going well, you want to document the process just so if you need to look back at it, you know the steps, and you can say to the school, I first contacted you about this problem on November 15th. It's now February 23rd. It's been X number of days. We have this paper trail. I've heard of parents asking for things like an IEP assessment verbally, and it's years later. There's just something about writing things down, memorializing conversations, that makes everybody take it more seriously, and it does trigger timelines.
Got it. Yep, makes sense. Question here just came in. What can I expect for planning for which high school opportunities will be discussed at the end of the 8th grade? Her son has autism, ADHD, and anxiety, and is at grade level with supports. He's currently in 7th grade and has putouts for language, math, and speech.
There's going to be a transition meeting. It's 20 to 30 minutes, somewhere between March and May. I always like to suggest the parents try to have it as early as possible. That way, if you feel like there's still some work to be done, you have time to troubleshoot. If you have a meeting in mid to late May and you don't like the way it's going, oh, see you next fall. It's going to lead to a stressful summer. So the school is going to arrange to have a transition meeting. People will come over from the high school and they will talk about options. Resource, the pullout for resource changes a lot in high school. It's typically an entire period versus going out for X number of minutes. And it's often considered a study skills class. There are different classes for kids who learn math and English at a slightly different rate. So there are some different options. So what the school will do is come and meet with you and your student and ask about their needs, and you can have a conversation and input on what that looks like. I also, and I apologize, I didn't think of it till now, recommend what we call a one-page profile for your child, which I can send the link to Marissa afterwards, and maybe she can offer that as a handout if that works. You have a really adorable picture of your child, and that's not hard. And then you have, what are the child's strengths? How does the child like to be supported? And it's, rather than a 20 to 50 page IEP, it's just kind of a how-to that introduces your kid on a more personal level and in a way most other parents aren't thinking of. So it's really helped break the ice for a lot of our students. The thing after is after your child goes to high school, there's typically a 30-day check-in meeting, which is an IEP to make sure it's going well and to see if you need to adjust goals now that you've gone from middle school to high school, if things have substantively changed during that transition. So you'll have multiple chances to kind of massage this and make it work better.
Awesome.
I do want to add one thing. While I think about transitions and children with anxiety, change can be very difficult, especially when you are moving from one school to another. So one thing to think about would be to ask for a tour. And if it takes more than one tour, do more than one tour. You can also ask to meet the case manager at the high school so your child knows someone that they can go to, that they can trust. And you can also meet teachers usually in advance. With high school and the current climate for teaching, it might not be as far in advance as you would like, but it's always a good idea to connect and see. The other thing with the one-page profile to remember is that it's an icebreaker for your child that they don't have to say. They don't have to say, I like Star Wars. It's just written down, and then the teacher can walk over and say, I was watching the Star Wars movie, and they can just break it in, and it just offers a way to connect.
Love that. That is great advice, Sarah. Next, I have been hearing a lot about extended school year. I have a question here. Do you recommend giving kids the summer off or doing some sort of extended school year?
I love this question. I always tell my clients, you can ask my opinion on anything because I have opinions on everything. If your child is going to lose a lot, has tremendous learning loss over the summer, which is usually the kids with higher support needs. If your child's going to lose a lot over the summer and it's going to take him or her several months to get back to where they were in May, then I do think extended school year is a good idea. Having said that, I do know kids that go from therapy to school to therapy, and they have 12-hour days at 6 and 7 years old. I think moderation and allowing kids time to be kids is valuable. So whether that's after around an extended school year, which is a shortened day, it's usually about 4 hours, or whether that's having the whole summer off. I know I loved getting out of school, and I really love school, but it's really nice to just fool around and look at the sky and do whatever it is, kids like to do, and not have every second structured. So think about your child's learning loss. Think about if they need and like the structure, and then think about giving them downtime, which I think is valuable for everybody.
That's awesome. Sarah, anything you want to add?
No, I think it's individual, and it's something that you really have to sit down and think about, and if it's a right fit for your family.
Yeah.
Awesome. Another question here. Rather than sending a child to a county program, can you request that same placement in regular school setting in a special ed classroom? Let me make sure I got that right. Bring behavioral supports, et cetera, to the school where they still have the opportunity to interact with typical peers. That's much less restrictive. See a lot of nodding. That's a good sign.
I've been down this route with my son and with other kids too. My son was in a county program, and they all needed a lot of support, and he just wasn't getting the help he needed, and giving him communication options didn't seem to be a priority. You can tell I like to talk. Giving my kid the opportunity to communicate is kind of a big deal too. So that's exactly what we did. We took him from a county program to a less restrictive county program to a district program. So absolutely, it's all about that least restrictive environment. And it started out a little bit at a time, and then he did more inclusion, and then more inclusion, and then full-time inclusion with the appropriate supports and those typical peers. So yes, you can. Sometimes schools don't want to do it because it goes back to what Sarah was talking about the money. I can put him in a county program. I've already got the aides there. I've got all the services. I've got all the kids. I don't really have to put a whole lot of time planning it, and I don't have to have any extra staffing. If I'm bringing him back to the school and including him, then I either have to pull staff from the specialized academic instruction room if he or she needs it, or I have to find other supports. Sometimes the supports are already there, but schools, like the rest of us, often take the path of least resistance. So if I can put them into a program that I already have that works, it's easier than putting her into a program where I have to build all these supports and monitor it and keep making it work. But you absolutely can request that.
Awesome. All right, next question here. So what would you say is typically the biggest benefit of working with an IEP advocate, and what are the cost considerations with that?
Do you want to go? Do you want me to?
I want to start.
Go ahead.
Reason number one is we become the bad guy, which I don't mind. It's a burden I'm willing to bear. Sometimes it's so overwhelming, and there's so much lingo. There are so many rules. There are so many timelines that it's just too much. And I personally hired an advocate as well for my own son. And you guys are looking at her because she's in this room. So I hired her personally because I couldn't do it anymore. It was too much. And my son was not getting what he needed. He was not progressing. We were constantly fighting and in all these meetings. So I told my husband that we just needed to hire somebody. I found her. I interviewed her. She was wonderful. And we've done a lot for my son in the public school setting with her help. And she is always the first person to say, I'll email him. So that's my big reason. It's because it relieves a huge amount of stress.
And Gwen, to go back to Gwen's question. So when you ask for county to go from county to regular ed, they're going to have 10 different reasons why you shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be able to fend off 5 or 6 of those reasons, but they'll keep shooting things at you till something something will seem reasonable and you'll say, okay, I understand why we can't do that. There is nothing we haven't heard before. I kind of compare it to Wonder Woman and her bracelets when I hear the excuses. They'll say, oh, you can't have, no, your child doesn't get a one-to-one because we don't want them to become dependent. And I'll say, I trust you to train your staff better than that. And I smile because I'm really good natured. And you can't get mad at me for saying that, can you? They can't give an excuse we haven't heard before. And our answers are actually kind of better than their answers, she says modestly. That's number one. Number two, it's IEPs have a group dynamic. And they all are kind of talking ed speak. And most parents haven't had time to learn the level of ed speak that the team has. You're busy working, taking care of your family, tending to your other relationships, taking care of your children. It's hard to speak their language, and it's even harder to do it not being able to. The third thing is when it's your child, especially if the meeting isn't going particularly well, I tell parents it's kind of like your heart's on the table and somebody's poking at it. Mm-hmm. We're good at I tell my clients, I'm better at advocating for your kid than I am mine, because you mess with my cub and it doesn't go well. But with your cub or your child, we care passionately, but it's not our heart on the table. The other thing we can do is we know how to ask for what the child needs by asking leading questions and not by trying to force anything in a meeting, but just asking questions. So they'll come up with a service or a placement or an idea for a kid that's just out there and just honestly quite ridiculous. And I'll just sit there and say, in all the years I've been doing this, I've never heard that suggested before. Can you give me more information? We know it's nonsense, and we can politely call them out in ways that move it forward, and they know not to try it on us. The other thing that's, I think, kind of a big deal. So whenever we start with parents, we look at their documents, and often the goals and the baselines are not written badly. And if you've got a great teacher, honestly, it kind of doesn't matter because your kid's going to get what they need. But you can't guarantee that you're going to have that teacher year by year. You can't guarantee you're not going to move. There's lots of things can change. So if your child is not progressing and you don't have well-written goals and well-written baselines, you don't have any leverage to force substantive changes. So a big part of what we do is go through there and show parents, these are the problems with the goals. These are the problems with the baseline. Here's what we're reading from the assessment. And here's, based on what you've told us in the assessment, where we think she should be in a year. How does this sound to you? And the parents will say, yes or no, and here's what we think. So what we can do is help you realize what you want for your kid that isn't appearing on the document that you already have. And most IEPs are not written very well. I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. When we look at a new IEP, it's like the goals and baselines are not objective and specifically measurable. Mm-hmm. It's the range for advocates is somewhere from about 160 to 230 an hour.
Where we live.
Yes, that's true. In the Bay Area.
I saw like Colorado, and I thought, well, I don't know if that's. I don't either.
Mm-hmm. So sorry to be long-winded, but there's a lot to cover in that answer.
Well, I love that good cop, bad cop dynamic.
Oh, and that too. Yeah, a parent today was feeling like telling the school that we were going to record might be taken as that, and I said, "Let me do it."
Exactly.
Before we go to this other topic, I had a similar question to Phil here around just finding the right advocate or a good advocate. Are there any questions you'd recommend families ask or anything, red flags to watch out for?
That is a great question. So we always recommend, I think everybody offers a free consult, and if they don't, you should request one anyway, because you want to make sure you're a good fit. You are going to be working very closely together. So if you're talking to an advocate and they just aren't listening to you, or you don't think that they have a good feel for your case, what's going on with your child, then it's not a good fit, because it is a business, but it's your kid. You know, it's a pretty personal relationship.
Mhm.
So how we have a list of what we recommend is kind of having a list of what you want. Our style is to say, is when somebody calls, it's just to kind of ask them questions. Tell me about your child. That's usually all it takes. So just kind of have your concerns about your child either written down or in your head, and then ask them for ideas on how they'd handle that.
Mhm.
And if the answers, if they seem like they're hearing you and your situation and have specific ideas that help your child, and you feel like you'd like to work with them or they can make your life better, then great. If not, there's somebody for everybody. Different people have different styles.
Mhm.
And I think just really making sure you share your concerns about your child and having confidence that, okay, they've seen that before. They know what they're doing in this case.
Right. One thing also that I wanted to mention is that you should feel really comfortable with who you're hiring for reasons such as you're sharing more than likely medical information, really sensitive things that, as Leigh mentioned a few minutes ago, this is your kid. And it is really, really hard to be vulnerable and to welcome someone else into your circle that might know information about your child and your family that one of your friends doesn't know, or a group of your friends doesn't know, because you're not comfortable sharing it. So you need to be able to talk to that person and listen to them and feel that you can be vulnerable with them and share that information and not feel like you're being judged. That for me was a huge, huge problem, because I had spoken to other advocates before Leigh. One of them who gave me really good free advice, so I used it and kind of guided it toward Leigh. But I think that is something that you really, really need to be at the forefront of. And you should really take notes while you're talking, because we don't always remember. So if you're going to have questions prepared, same questions for all the providers. If you're not local, you can actually go onto COPA's website, copaa.org, and you can look through their directory, and that will help you.
Awesome. Another question here. What can you do when they want to send your child home for a behavior that's due to their anxiety, due to their disability? I've heard, unfortunately, a lot of cases like this where there's different behaviors coming up, kids get sent home. What can families be asking for in their IEPs to help with this? As another follow-up here, sending the child home can actually be a reward.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sarah, do you want to go? Do you want to start, or would you like me to?
Yeah, we're not laughing because it's funny. We're laughing because we've seen it many times. We do have a client, as Leigh said, in second grade that was being sent home, or not even fully sent home some days. It was the trip to the office. And then the office was busy. So then he had to go somewhere else. And then they're just trying to flit this child around. So it became a process of the school avoiding the actual issue. And the behavior plan was not being implemented with fidelity. We're working through that. We have another client who is in kindergarten, whose sibling is in the same building. And this child needs a lot of behavioral supports because she has anxiety and she elopes, and found out right before a meeting a couple of weeks ago that her brother is hearing on the walkie-talkies that the administrators have to go chase this child down. So he's in another class and there's a walkie-talkie on the teacher's desk, and he's hearing that his sister needs to go get taken care of. We have no idea how many times this has happened before we knew about it. So we're unwinding that as well. Unfortunately, I think as a parent, the hardest thing to do is to leave your child in that situation. When they call you and say, he's having a really hard day, your instinct is to just run there. Bare feet doesn't matter. You're going to show up and help your baby. Unfortunately, that doesn't help in the long run. So it needs to be documented. We ask schools for a suspension slip. If you're asking the kid to go home, you're effectively suspending them. They will fight you. They will say, well, this isn't a suspension. Then what are you calling it? We had one administrator tell us, well, she wanted to take him home, the mother.
That's not what the mother said, but details.
Right. So documenting will help in the long run, and leaving your kid at school and saying, I'm not able to come pick them up. I'm sorry, but can we get documentation? Leigh, did you want to add?
And then you make that in your next IEP, or you call an IEP and you say, coming home to hang with me is a reward. We need to stop rewarding this. It's only going to make it worse. And you get the team's buy-in, and you make them come up with a concrete plan for what they're going to do with your son or daughter when the anxiety causes behaviors. You also want to get the school's behaviorist involved, and if necessarily, come up with a behavior support plan. If it's to that point, one would hope they'd already done it, but if not, request a functional behavior analysis immediately and get that going and say, no, we are not going to reward our child's behavior. We are not going to support you in encouraging them to come home, which is inadvertently what you're doing. But again, that needs to be documented in the IEP.
Two things you just said, Leigh, I just want to make sure we reiterate. I think you mentioned about calling an IEP and requesting a functional behavior assessment. Could you talk a little bit more about what the different things our parents can request and when? I know I hear from parents all the time, they think they can't call for IEP meetings any time of the year, for example, but just things like that would be helpful.
Thank you. Great question. You could call. So sometimes the district's getting a little difficult with me and doesn't want to finish a meeting, or doesn't want to go an extra 15 or 20 minutes, doesn't want to resolve something. In the meeting, I will turn to the parent and smile and go, you can call as many IEP meetings as you like. We could have a meeting every week if you want to. And the whole team goes, holy crap, that's a nuclear option. But you could. You really could. You won't be popular, but you really could. So anytime there's a substantive change, you could have a quick meeting. That shouldn't be a long meeting. You could even ask if they'd be willing to do it via email. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But you can have as many IEP team meetings as you need to have. Now, I used to get sick to my stomach before every one of my son's IEP meetings. And some years he had 6 or 8. So I had a lot of upset stomachs. So I get it's not anything anybody wants to do, except for those of us wacky enough to do this for a living. We kind of mostly enjoy it. But as a parent, it's less enjoyable, but you have the number you need to have to get your child the support she or he needs. Mm-hmm. If and when your child's having behavior problems and district isn't doing anything except sending them home or sending you snarky notes, in writing in an email, you request behavior support. Say, my child is having these behavior problems, as you know, that I believe need to be addressed for her to access her free and appropriate public education. So could we do a full behavior assessment? And typically that is a functional behavior analysis. And from that comes a behavior intervention plan. And from that comes specific goals around rewards, if that's what your child's into, about the appropriate support. Maybe they need to go speak to a trusted person on campus when they're feeling anxious. Maybe they need to go see the counselor. Maybe. The role of the behaviorist is to figure out what your child needs to do to manage their anxiety in school, because a lot of autistic kids have significant anxiety problems, as do other neurotypical kids as well. So this is a common problem, and that's exactly what behavior support can work towards.
Also, I think I want to mention that it is it is a fact that the staff and faculty at the school can also call an IEP team meeting. As much as they might not want to, if they notice there are deficits or there are concerns that are not already addressed in the IEP, they could and honestly should call a meeting. Has that ever happened with my own son? No, never. But I mention it all the time in meetings with my advocate.
Yes.
In our last 5 minutes here, Lisa, I'd be curious if you have any advice for parents for before and after. I know, of course, there's so much focus here on our kids and just making sure they have the resources and support you need, but any advice you would give to parents or caregivers on making sure, they're feeling good before and after and taking care of themselves too.
Like I said, I was sick to my stomach every time, so I might be the wrong person to ask. But having said that, be prepared. If you know what your points are. So for instance, back up. Part of getting the documents in advance is you can look at that, you can make notes. What we do is write on the goals. Could you work with me to make this specific and measurable and ask some questions? So a lot of that can get done before the meeting, and you can just more focus on just getting through the document and talking about how amazing the child is during the meeting. Going in prepared so you're not surprised. My kid was young and I didn't know obviously what I know now. And I went in and there were 13 people and I had no idea what they were going to hit me with. And then I read these reports how my kid has no capability at all. And I'm reeling. I'm like, oh, and I don't know what to do. And all these people do know what to do. And so the more you go in prepared, knowing what they're going to say because you've asked for the documents and read them, you're not going to get surprised. And knowing what to expect is a huge part of it. Write down your questions, write down the answers. And something we'll see a lot is we'll ask a question and they'll start to answer the question and then they'll veer off into Cleveland. I don't know. If they didn't answer the question, gently bring it back and say, thank you for sharing that. Now, ask the question again and make sure you get the answer. The other thing is to make sure that all of your concerns were addressed at the meeting. Sometimes, and that's why you write them down before, sometimes teams will present, well, our psychologist didn't see it. As a full IEP team member, what you see and what you think matters. So make sure it's been addressed, and if it hasn't, then keep asking till it is. Persistence is key. And you can get away with asking a lot of really hard questions by smiling. I get away with it all the time.
Absolutely. And not naming names. Don't use anybody's name. I think going into an IEP meeting as a parent, I have the same feelings of anxiety and nausea. I have a close circle of friends of children who have significant learning and special needs. And normally the 3 nights prior to the lead up to the meeting, you're not sleeping much. You're just not. All I try to do for myself is eat well, coming up to the meeting, drink a lot of water. I try really, really hard to walk in after already reading through everything more than one time. IEPs and special education in general are deficit-based. So you walk into that room knowing that your child has all these needs that have not been met, right? That's why we're here. We're here to catch them up. And it's really, really difficult to pull yourself out of that mode and not take it personally. Walking in with prepared questions and being cognizant of the time that's remaining in the meeting, because sometimes you'll see people try and drag it out and go on and on and on. And it's like, no, I don't want to hear all that stuff. I want to know why. And thinking of it as a collaborative effort. Sometimes it helps to imagine my best friends at the meeting And I think I look at someone and they don't necessarily look like her, but then I can vision in my head that she's sitting there looking at me, and it just makes me feel like I have a friend. Sorry. Meetings are hard. And then if you don't understand something, do not wait. Don't let them finish rambling with whatever reasoning they're giving you. Stop them and say, hold on, I don't understand what you just said. Can you stop?
And yes, ask for explanations, because they'll use stuff I've never heard of. And I'll say, I'm sorry, I'm not clear what we're talking about here. So there's no chance my client is clear. It's okay to ask and not to know. And actually, the person who wrote that it's don't go alone, I took my mother-in-law once. She was hard of hearing and from another country. I just wanted somebody on my side. She had nothing to add, but yes, it's nice to have somebody there who's rooting for your kid unabashedly.
Yes, you can invite people who have knowledge of your child. You can invite your best friend.
Yep.
That's
And
fine.
Sarah's right. So what they'll do is they'll often read the first part of the document to you and then leave 10 minutes for the goals. So you don't really have time to look at them or discuss them. It's better to stop and call a second meeting and don't give the bums rush, or keep the meeting moving, one of the two.
Yes.
So that you can get everything done. But if not, it's much better to break and come back again and do it properly than to get rushed just to get things done. That is a common technique. Good job, sir.
Yeah, well, and they'll say, "Oh, we'll go ahead and read this. I don't need you to read to me. I already read it." And you can say, "You know what? I've already read it. Can we skip this section?" Unless you have a question in that section, and then because you already wrote it down, but you can skip ahead and sort of spend most of the meeting on the meat rather than the niceties. I mean, also, we've been in meetings where the staff, it's 10 to 12 staff, which is wonderful that everybody's participating, but they spend 30 minutes talking about what they like about the student. When let's keep it to one or two things. Oh, and my mom tip, because I'm a mom, I like to bring my son's picture. And I just hold it up and say, this is who we're talking about today. Because it humanizes the process. I think that, unfortunately, with a lot of these meetings, it just becomes another student, another student, another student. So the last one I think I did, I brought a picture of him with our 2 French bulldogs and just held it up and said, this is who we're talking about today. And if you've never heard of these dogs, then you're not communicating with my kid.
Oh, I love that. Wow. Incredible advice. Thank you both all so much for the advice and for everyone for your questions tonight. We really appreciate it. We will send a follow-up note with next steps, with the recording, with an opportunity to continue the conversation. We have a free online community where you can continue to engage with Leigh and Sarah and other families and experts. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it and hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. We had a blast.
It was wonderful. Thank you.